everybody, to an almost perfect podcast. It's good to see you all and to share this time with you. Glad you're tuning in this week. I am John. That is our good friend Tom.
Hey.
And Wade is here with us.
Good morning.
And we're still missing our friend Brad, who is with his family and taking care of everything he needs to take care of as they continue to mourn his father's passing. So keep him and his family in prayer. In the meantime, we are holding down the fort here, aren't we, fellas?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are.
And we know how to do it right. We know how to take care of things. Anything historical happened to you this weekend?
This weekend? No.
No, not this weekend.
Not at all.
It's been a pretty quiet week, actually.
Yeah.
Whatever reason. Yeah.
Good for you. I did admit to my church, I watched too much cable news and was on Facebook too much this week. I just couldn't help myself, back and forth, trying to figure out or see, all right, has anybody called anything? What are the numbers? And I tell you this, I know why people are crazy. It's too much Facebook and too much cable news, man. I'm just going nuts.
I stayed off of social media at least politically, for Tuesday through Saturday. I did watch too much cable news, and I was on some cable news websites watching the electoral map, just because. And my biggest motivation was, I hope this gets over pretty soon.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's tiring, and and the expectation would go on. Interestingly enough, I was with my brother in the Houston area on Friday and Saturday, and he connected me with a podcast, and the title of that I think it's called Radio Log, but the particular podcast he sent me a link to is called What If, and it was a group of folks who they were tied into the political system in Washington, D.C. And back in June, they did a what if process, and they worked out the different scenarios. And the one that they shared on the podcast was an ambiguous outcome. And it was so interesting because, like I said, I'm actually listening to this Saturday morning as I'm walking in my brother's neighborhood, and recalling, oh yeah, this came out in June. But I learned a lot of history in that process. But it starts out with what if there's an ambiguous result? And I remember the thing that was right out of this past week was President Trump declares early as the votes are coming in, declares triumph because he has an early lead, and then the Biden camp counters with "be patient," and I'm going, that's exactly what happened on Tuesday night, and like I said, the whole thing led to a lot of things I didn't know, like the term, what is it? You have the Electoral College, and you have faithless voters, I think is what they're called, is that they ignore what they've been sent in as, and they vote their conscience, they vote different, and has that ever happened before? Yeah, historically it's happened before. Has a state sent two delegates that had different preferences in the past? Oh yeah, in fact, it's interesting because of happen to know one of the turning points in Black history, as far as the Black vote primarily went Republican, and then it changed to Democrat, and it was when two different delegates were sent, one for it was like 1876. I can't. Rutherford B. Hayes, and I believe is the one, and another for the other candidate, and it was just very interesting. So,
well, and aren't we glad though that all the drama's over? Since
Tom, did you vote for Rutherford B. Hayes?
after hearing that whole thing, I doubt I would have voted for him. But I kind of like this. I'm not too thrilled every 4 years because, and honestly, I think the hard thing for me is finally when I think there was this turning point where I was older than the sitting president, and that was with Obama, and for that moment, it was kind of a proud moment. As I'm finally older than the president. I've been older than my doctor. I've been older than my dentist. Now I'm older than my president. And
congratulations, Tom. That's
and now I didn't even have that choice. I was gonna say both of there was old and there was older.
So, well, they were both like, let's see who can be the oldest, more older than Tom. That's what they were going for.
Yeah, that was what this whole campaign was about.
That's what I thought.
Anyway.
So thanks Wade for bringing that up.
Well, I always like to be as helpful as I can on this podcast.
Yes, that's what we're here for, man. We are here to support each other. And I guess that's part of my frustration. A little more serious talk is, through all this is I have a hypocrisy, right? It runs deep on both sides, and it gets tiring trying to be the one to call it out, and also acknowledging it when you see it in yourself as well. That just gets tiring after a while. Because nobody really wants to hear it, apparently. I'd like to think that if somebody told me, John, you're being a little hypocritical because you said this and then you said that, but then you're acting like this. Come on, John. I think I would appreciate that if somebody were to tell me that, but then again, who knows? I just might get offended, right? And that's kind of where we are right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So how about this? I'll give you a choice. I got a couple stories with all the hectic nature of everything that's gone on this week. We need to kind of take a breath. So I'll give you the choice. Which one you want to talk about? Which one? I'll just give you the title, and the titles may speak for themselves. We may not even have to talk about them. So there's one: man marries himself after fiance breaks up with him, or man banned from Yellowstone for trying to cook chicken in hot spring.
Wow.
I'm trying to figure out if I were to put like Tom and Wade's name to one of those stories, which one would I put? Who'd be the fried chicken guy here at Yellowstone?
That's Tom for sure.
Well, I will say at least I've been to Yellowstone, so I can picture that. But no,
not really fried chicken though. It's either steamed or poached.
Yeah, I was thinking or boiled.
You got to have a little imagination, man. Of all the things to do at Yellowstone, let's bring some chicken.
A little oil.
A lot of oil. Anyway, he's on probation. He had to pay a couple of fines. And while he's on this probation, he's not allowed to go back to Yellowstone for
Is he allowed to have wings?
Depends on how he wants to make them.
Okay. All right.
It depends. So some people are crazy, man, and then the other one, I mean, kind of fill in the blanks. He and his fiance got in some fights over the summer, and instead of calling it off, he just went ahead with it. And you see the pictures, and there he is. He's just happy. He's carrying the bouquet. All his family and friends are there, and he's just up there with the minister, I suppose, by himself. Can you imagine the fights he's gonna have?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to marry myself.
One of those split personalities. Yeah.
I feel too sorry for Gloria already. I couldn't imagine doing that to myself. So.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. I sent you guys a link. Did you have a chance to look at that?
I did skim it. Yeah.
That was interesting.
I don't even know when you sent it or where you sent it. So
He sent it about 3 minutes ago.
oh, okay, yeah.
Not
It
an
was
hour ago.
Let me read the title for everyone who's listening, and then we can kind of pick it apart a little bit. It's kind of, I just think it's interesting. It's a good thought because it relates to how we read scripture and,
Right.
of course, how that's related to our faith. But the title of the article, which is off of Huffington Post, is 2020 Feels Like an Apocalypse because it is one. And how much of this do I want to read? Oh, let's see here. The apocalypse is here, says Professor of New Testament at Harvard Divinity School, Giovanni Bazzana, I believe. In fact, he believes it's always with us. And the premise that he gives for his article, this idea is that what definition of apocalypse means. And it seems like a lot of us might be confused about what that means, right? In your regular day-to-day church life, when people think of apocalypse, what do they think of?
more like the end times.
Yeah, end times, end of the world.
End of the world.
Is that true for you, Wade?
No.
No.
I don't really teach about sort of some of the accepted theology around end times. So
hold it, just wait a minute. So Wade, are you saying I'm not like Tom who teaches that the apocalypse is the end time?
No.
I'm just saying I think people in general, when they hear apocalypse, they think end times. So now coming back.
You're right. But for me, it's, I sort of agreed with the article that apocalypse is, in fact, one of the things that came to my mind when I was reading the article was, remember the movie Apocalypse Now?
Apocalypse Now, yep.
I mean, that's really, I think that was an accurate description of that movie. And I think it's an accurate description of, various times in history that probably aren't even don't even seem as significant to us as right now in 2020 seems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why don't you, for us viewing at home, describe then what an apocalypse is? So
here's what he says. The trials of 2020 are an apocalypse in the original sense of the Greek word, he claims, a revelation or uncovering, right? And so the book of Revelation, which is what we think of in terms of scripture being apocalyptic literature, that's what Revelation is, right? It is a revealing, the revelation of John, the revealing of something or uncovering of something, and what John sees is the revelation of Jesus, right? This year has revealed truths about American society that can't be ignored or swept under the rug, Bazzana suggested, whether it's inequality in healthcare, racial injustice, or the ineptitude of the government. Watch out. It's important to remember that apocalypse means revelation. It's the moment that reveals something about one individual's life or about society in general. I think this is really a moment of big revelations, not revelations in terms of visions or prophecies, but revelations in the sense of seeing the truth of things. How does that relate to what we read, for example, in the book of Revelation? How does that tie together with this idea of what we are experiencing in 2020 and what we read in Revelation?
Well, I think he talked about it a little bit in the article. My reading of Revelation is that it is a vision of a guy named John, of things that were probably happening at the time in relation to, some atrocities that happened in the Roman Empire, and I would imagine that just some of what we read about that period of history is just, I imagine it was in a pretty apocalyptic time, and in my lifetime, I'm sure that there's more than this, but I think I think Vietnam and the civil rights was an uncovering.
Sure.
I think and I'm just picking the high points. I think sort of the fall of communism was an uncovering. And I think 2020 has been an uncovering in terms of, some of the health things that are going on, some of the real sensitivities that if maybe were under the surface a little bit about race in this country have come out into the open. And regardless of how you feel about that, those, it's very real. And the fact that we had such a close election and we had record numbers of people, both candidates got more votes for president than any other candidate ever had.
Right.
So that means that the population has been energized or activated in some way, which tells me that this is probably we're gonna look back on this year as being a real pivotal time in history for a lot of different reasons. And so that feels very apocalyptic to me.
And I would say one of the surprising things, I know if you leaned one way or the other, whether you lean Democrat or a Republican, the hope was that there would be first of all, you hoped your candidate won. And second is that it would be a clear revelation that most of America agrees with my position. And, if anything, that you have a truly mixed bag and you don't walk away and say, we're all on the same page. We're all responding in the same way. Which is the ongoing question that people have always asked is how in the world can you vote for? And I've heard it on both sides of the aisle. How in the world can you vote for Trump and how in the world can you not vote Republican if you're a Christian? I mean, so both of those statements are still out there. How in the world can somebody else? And I would love it if we would have genuine dialogue around those questions rather than immediately, throwing people under the bus, calling them fascists or, liberal hippie, druggies, whatever term the other decides to throw in, because if we probed into the actual questions with, let's say, openness and curiosity, then we could actually move forward in a way that we haven't moved in the past, which kind of brings us back to, we being United Methodists, we've got some pretty big conversations to have with one another and our future.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I this morning I'm part of several different groups online, whatever, and there's always somebody asks the question, hey, I'm teaching a class on this, or I'm going to be doing this group, whatever. Does anybody have any curriculum? Everybody's always looking for the newest and best curriculum. I think curriculum is great. It has its place, but I feel like instead of Christian curriculum, let's learn how to have Christian conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Let's learn how to be able to talk with one another and maintain our sense of other, right, that we see within each other, and have a meaningful and fruitful, even if it's a disagreeable conversation, it can be had in love, because that's supposed to be like who we are as the body of Christ, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that does this whole idea about revealing, and what we've gone through this year, what we are going through this year, and who knows what we may go through next year, whenever, learning to see what's being unrevealed through the lens of our faith and what God might be leading us to is important, because we need to pay attention, take time to reflect, right? What are we learning? What have we seen? And then that leads us to what I really wanted us to talk about today in the larger picture. Last week we had Tina Carter on,
yeah.
and she shared a great conversation with us about, answering the question, why do bad things happen? And one of the things she said about her experience is that she stopped asking the question. Well, she didn't say it that way. She asked the question, what now? Right. So she had this terrible diagnosis, and it was this hard circumstance. And so what her and her husband had to decide was, well, what do we do now, given our circumstances? And for them, the first part of that response was to participate in clinical trials and all those kinds of things. But it made me think about another conversation that I heard several weeks back on another podcast, Device and Virtue. And they had the founder of Grubhub on. You guys ever use Grubhub?
I'm familiar with it. I've seen enough commercials, but
yeah, you ever wait, 30 minutes for a $7 sandwich that end up costing you 30 because, taxes and everything else. So anyway, the founder of Grubhub is actually a Christian, and that was part of what he was sharing on here. And he got into this conversation a little bit about, what do you do? And he says that the question of why me doesn't have an answer, right? You'll never find like a right answer to the question of why me. What does have an answer is actually the same question that Tina gave to us is, what's next, right? Yeah. So if we understand 2020, if we can see all these different parts of 2020 being these big revelations about things that are being shown to us, and if we're learning things, then let's talk a little bit about this idea of what next, right? What do we do with the things we learn about ourselves? What do we do with the things we learn about our world when it comes to our personal circumstances, when it comes to our politics, and even, and this is a big one for me, I think for all of us, when it comes to ministry, how do we approach the question of what next? What do we do next? How do we find that answer?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm very aware of that very question. What's next? It started yesterday morning when somebody was prior to the service actually had made a comment the previous week and about my message, and it was, they were a little troubled. And but anyway, he asked, so what's next? And I go, what do you mean? And he said, today. So what's next? And it was interesting and I didn't anticipate that, and it certainly didn't alter what I said during the service, but it was amazing how many times in my message that phrase was just a natural phrase. So what's next? And what I was looking at was the different circumstances where there was an uncertain outcome, and what was next. What's next for the person is not the outcome as much as the decision. Make a choice. Well, so this morning I'm reading. In this particular case, Ellen has subscribed to the Washington Post, and I'm reading an article, and one of the things I really appreciated about
I got that deal too, man.
Well, but the question came up: what's next?
What's next?
And so that's beyond the election results, beyond the pandemic, beyond the social unrest. The question for us as followers of Jesus Christ is so how do we respond to that, and what's the next step that we take?
Yeah. I haven't done it in a while. I believe I can't remember which church it was. As part of my sermon preparation, we used to include on the church bulletin section, and I believe it was called it What Next, but if it wasn't What Next, it was kind of related to that. And so I would, just a simple 1 or 2 sentence thing to do in response to the message we heard. And, writing and preparing for a 20-minute sermon wasn't all that difficult. Praying for it wasn't all that difficult. What I found the most difficult was figuring out that one next step for somebody to take as a result of hearing this word of God. I would spend probably almost an entire day, because I didn't want to just give, go home and pray more, right? Something simple like that. I wanted to kind of give something thoughtful. And that was the hardest thing to figure out. All right, we heard the good news of Jesus Christ. What's next? Right? Are we just going to leave the same, or are we going to do something different? So I don't know. What do you think, Wade?
So I think that's a great thought. I think sometimes, because I like to do that as well, if not writing something down in a bulletin, at least challenging people in a specific way. And so oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes I'll start with that.
Sure.
I'll do, before I write the sermon, I've done my research and I'm like, well, what could we do coming out of this? Or what could be the next step? And then with that in mind, and I think that's a really hard thing to do, and to kind of vary enough that it's meaningful. But if you can get that down, I mean, that's kind of like, one of the things I used to do too is before I wrote the sermon was come up with the sermon in a sentence. Well, this is more of a sending in a sentence. And I think if you can do that, and I don't know that I've specifically done that lately. I think I've been more of I wrote the sermon and came up with the action as a result of that. But I have in the past started there. And so that's easy to do with the sermon. Although it's not always super simple. It's harder to do in the midst of, calamity. What do I do next? That's different. I think that's kind of a different thing. Because sometimes you can't plan ahead. Who knew there was going to be a pandemic and all this crazy stuff that's been going on, and you can't just rail against it, right? It's here. It's happening.
Yes, I can. I can be like, I have a Facebook account, man. I can rail against anything.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I mean, because what I have found is, first of all, nobody wants to hear my railing, and then there's probably a segment of people who are absolutely 180 degrees away from my railing.
Yeah.
And so, the question for me, and I think for all of us, is what are we going to do about it? And being hand wringing and anxious about it I don't find that helpful. And at some point, whatever the circumstances are, I just have to get to a place of acceptance, and then, do the next right thing. When it's for me, when it's for somebody else, I have to, kind of help them figure that out for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has to be, and I don't know, one of the things as a pastor, over the years have started things in particular churches, mission conferences and, different, let's just say different things. And this is what we need to do. Well, the moment I leave and the next pastor comes in, and that transition, that gets dropped, and very rarely, on occasion, am I actually a part of something that is a we, that when I leave is still very much a part of the DNA of the church, and part of the reason for that is, and I'm assuming you all have kind of learned this lesson. I'm a little slow, but some of that is recognizing who the people are, what kind of the DNA is within the context of a particular church, and in order to learn that, it's more about listening and learning before you start the teaching aspect, and again, like you said, Wade, is helping people discern their own next step, not the next step I think you should take. And I don't know about you, even when I'm preaching, it helps every now and then to recognize that the message I'm bringing I need to stop thinking about, well, this would really be good for my wife, or this would be really good for this particular person, and start listening and saying, oh, this would really be good for me. And then coming off of that and saying, so what am I going to do? As especially both of you have already implied, is, we take a lot into that moment of preparation, the actually putting together the message, so much information, and we are the best informed for each message. So we should have some kind of idea of how this applies to our own lives.
Sure. And the line I really try to walk to is, like you said, letting someone hear what you're saying, which we assume is directed by the Holy Spirit, God's word for God's people, and that each one of us has to make a decision about what's next.
Yeah.
And I feel like the line I try to walk, and then I try to lean a little more the other way, is for us to figure out what our next step is as a collective body, right? And I think those two go together. I don't think they're distinct enough to say that you can't have, one goes without the other. They need each other. And so part of what I'm trying to figure out is, as a church, what is our next step, right? So we've been kind of playing around with it, the world's in turmoil right now, so it seems, because we had this election that was, it revealed some things, didn't it? All right. And so as the church, I want to help find the answer to the question, what's next for us? Right. We just learned something, or we are learning some things through all of this time now. All right. Now that we learned that, what's next? What are we going to do? Right. What did we learn about ministry in the pandemic? When the pandemic's over, do we just go back to normal? What's next? What do we do? We just, I don't want to use the word divided. I think that's a word that cable news and other people who like to sell stuff have got us to buy into. We are polarized, but I don't think we're as divided as we think we are. I think a lot of that's just been dug into us. We have different opinions, but that doesn't mean we have to be divided. But we are polarized, right? And we do have differences of opinions, and things are emotional right now, and things are difficult, and people are expressing some really, I don't know, some bad behavior, bad feelings, and all kinds of stuff. So as the church, what's next? What are we going to do next for the world? Because we are the city on the hill, right?
Yeah.
Pregnant pause here.
Hey, but you know what? That's actually good, because the church, we need to take a pause, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know if I was recording when I said that. I'll confess it again, because I want to be that transparent. I watched too much cable news, and I was on Facebook too much this week. And learn, I had to just pause. You know what? I'm done with that, to kind of refresh, right? And we're sort of used to hearing, all right, here's a problem. Let me give you an answer. Give me your quick response. And, we expect people to give us an answer and just crank out, and without any kind of reflection or any kind of thought. And maybe it is good just to pause and be uncomfortable in the silence as the church.
Well, there are a lot of hard questions, and I think one of the things that the church struggles with, I mean, it's kind of like, when I was growing up, the issue of sex was a very uncomfortable conversation in my family. Evidently, my parents, after 6 children, had some experience in that area, some information that would have helped a 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy kind of navigate that process. But it was an uncomfortable conversation. It didn't feel like it was a safe thing to talk about. And I know that that when, politics and religion, certainly in certain families, we just don't go there. And because it feels, it's just, one, it's uncomfortable, and two, in that particular environment, it's unsafe. And what I guess hurts my soul, or at least makes my soul deeply sad, is that we know we need to have uncomfortable conversations, and yet we don't provide the safe place to work out those, so that we come to a common place of agreement and an ability to move forward in a healthy and helpful way, where we actually are light in a dark world, or salt. We bring some color and flavor to the conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's what we try to do here, right, with our podcast. I think before we got started, we never, I don't think I've ever inquired, like, hey, Tom, how do you vote? What do you think about this? Or, which way do you, we never had those kind of conversations, because when it comes to this, I don't know that it matters as much as people think it does. What matters is our shared faith, right? And how do we live out of that, instead of in that identity, instead of our political identity or ideologies and whatnot. So if we're going to wind down the next few minutes, considering all we learned about 2020, all that we learned from the pandemic, all that we learned from the election, all that we may have learned from personal turmoil or whatnot, what would you tell somebody about that? Would you say, in a way, the next right thing? What is maybe the next right thing for us to look for as the body of Christ, or what next for us would you offer people who are listening?
I think, as we think about difficult conversations, or looking across at somebody who is that we perceive to be different than us or in disagreement with us, is that agreement is different than understanding. I can understand where you're coming from without agreeing that that's where I'm coming from. And if I can understand that, then even if I don't agree, I can respect your point of view. We don't have to agree on everything to be in relationship with each other. Is anybody married? I mean,
there's one guy that's married to himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even then, could you really come to any agreement? So,
doggone it, me, I left the underwear on the floor again. Godly.
I don't know about you guys, but I have never served a church where everybody agreed on everything. It's never happened.
Yeah.
And pretty much, really every church I've been in, for, I would say 85% of things, we don't agree, but we love one another enough to kind of look past that. So, this week, I knew when I was preaching that there were people in the room from every, persuasion of politics. And I felt like I had to say some things about our process during the week. But I knew that the people who were of different persuasions in the room politically, I knew that they really like each other, and they talk to each other, and they hang out with each other, and they have community with one another, and they don't agree on this. And they may not agree on some other things either, but they care about each other. And to me, that's the mind of Christ, that we care about each other. Think about Jesus's disciples. I was talking about this last night. There's Simon the Zealot. He wanted to physically overthrow the government. I mean, that was his deal. And then you had Matthew, who was a tax collector, who was completely complicit with the government, and they're in the same small group. And we don't hear about them disagreeing. I'm sure they did, but we don't hear about that so much. And when they disagree with Jesus, we hear them having difficult conversations, and they don't break up. They keep moving on. So I think that's what I would say. Understanding is different than disagreement, and we should all seek understanding.
Seek understanding. That's a good word. Tom, what would you how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I'm glad Wade was the first to answer that, because it gave me a little bit of time to reflect on how I would answer that. But here's an interesting thing, because you know, Wade, you said I've never been in a church where everybody agreed, and I started thinking about it as I've never been in a room where everybody agreed.
Right.
I've never been in a family where everybody agreed. I mean, you can just go through the list, and one of the things, kind of coming back to that family situation, is one of the things that and I don't know how significant this is. Maybe it's just me, but it's not the opinions that kind of hold me together with, say, my wife or my siblings. What holds me together is and this is one of the things I've seen over and over again. It is good to be with people who can affirm the reality of my life, and what are the reality of common held experiences, meaning I get a little teared up on this. I'm trying to think. 2014, I was in Wimberley when we had the flood. And there's there are people I may not agree with politically that I have a tight bond with, because we went through an experience together. Sure. And everyone who was there during that 24-hour period knows, not necessarily, I don't know what it's like to escape a flood. I know what it is to rescue a family who has escaped from a flood. And what it is to have their big old dog in our home, trying to make space with our dog, who is a big dog at the same time. And it's those common experiences within the context of our faith that makes those difficult conversations worth it, because what you affirm in me is we've gone through something together, and we've seen how God has taken care of that. So, like I said, I'm glad you were first again, Wade, because it gave me some insight personally that I go, oh, that's why I'm with these people. It's not because we voted the same or even our discussions are the same. It's we have common ground and we have common experiences, and we move forward into our future based on that.
So Wade, we're going to vote you valedictorian for the week. Good job.
Do I get like a cord or something?
We'll find something. Yeah, we'll put a cord around your neck, man. Don't worry. So Wade says to seek understanding. Tom says to seek common experiences. I think those are great words, brothers. I appreciate that. That's go a long way in living out our faith and joining each other in some important conversations and life in general. So thank you for that. And as we wind down here, let's remind each other. I just read also this morning, Texas, we reached over talk about a shared experience, right? 1 million cases of the coronavirus in Texas. New cases are up 40% lately. So we still got to be careful. Talk about having to endure something together. Let's be patient with one another. Let's do the best we can to take care of each other, and let's keep praying for one another and get us through this time. And whatever we learn from it, let's be willing to do something with it, right? Whenever I teach Revelation, one of the things I say, because it was that one good mark I got in seminary. A lot of people, we read Revelation and we say, oh, well, it's about the end of the world. It's not about the end of the world. It's about the end of your world, right? And what are you going to do now that your world, which is all about you and all about everything that's all about you, now that that's gone and you realize that actually the world is about Christ, what are you going to do? Right now that you've seen the revelation of Jesus, what are you going to do? So that's a helpful conversation, guys. It was almost perfect. It wasn't quite perfect, but you keep trying, and maybe next week we'll get it. So if you're listening, thanks for listening. We tried our best. We'll get there. Thanks for listening in. If there's ever anything you want us to talk about, to take a crack at, to try to figure out a Christ-like response, let us know. Either send us a message here on Facebook, or I'm sure some of you have Tom's text phone number. You can send him a text or send Wade an angry email or something.
Yeah.
Wade is the receiver of all angry emails on our behalf. So thank you for that.
I love those.
So until next week, guys, have a great rest of the week. Tom, Wade, thank you so much for the gift of your time. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, man.
All right. God be with you.